A housing collapse, a market downturn, a recession. These are economic realities for all Americans, yet not all realities are created equal. African Americans have been hit hard by our current economic troubles, with historically persistent gaps in wealth, health, and prosperity widening even more in the past few years. We examine recession realities, public policy, and the economic future of Black America. Today on The Professors.
From across the city and the 7 city colleges of Chicago, broadcasting from 63rd and Halsted at Kennedy King College. Professors take the art of conversation to a higher degree.
I'm C.M. Winters Palacio. Joining me today are Professor Temple Hempfield from Kennedy King College and Akili Lee, the Director of Digital Strategy and Development at the Digital Youth Network. Welcome all.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're here to talk about Blacks and the economy and the widening gap, the disproportionate gap. As you all are you all familiar with the Pew study that recently came out, right? It talked about the gap is even wider, and it's almost reflective of conditions prior to, what was it, 1984?
84 during the Reagan.
During the Reagan administration. Now, I'll be honest with you, for this conversation, as much as I want to maintain a sense of professionalism, I really believe that I'm on the inside looking out on this particular dialogue. So, it doesn't take all day to recognize sunshine, right?
Right.
There is a wide, disproportionate gap of African Americans affected by this recession.
And I believe, CM, if you don't mind me jumping in here,
Please do.
I believe young men between the ages, African American males between the ages of 20 and 34, I believe the unemployment rate is at 38%, I believe. I read that. Have you all read something near there? That's just unacceptable. It's
But
unacceptable.
some would say that this has always been a problem.
Not at this level, though, right?
Not at this level.
Not at this level.
And with all things being relative, I mean, end of the day, you know, if the country is, you know, is doing bad, end of the day, we're at the bottom of that list, you know. So Black males, especially to Temple's point, you know, if we have an unemployment issue across the country where we're looking at 9 to 10%, Black males are going to be, you know, much worse than that. So right now we're looking at, you know, Blacks in general being close to almost twice the national average in terms of unemployment. Really looking at Black males and young Black males, I think is one very, very interesting case study for how we should say, you know, how do we have more targeted supports around looking at that particular population, as opposed to saying we do a kind of one-size-fits-all solution that if it helps, you know, white males in a certain age group or a certain part of the country, by default is going to end up helping those Black males who are already disproportionately affected by even in a good economy. So
do you think that there should be some special intercession by the federal government? Because this one particular group, African Americans, are just completely being chewed up.
Right.
Does that require an alarm to say, okay, we have a certain section of our community that is drowning,
right,
and we should run intercession? Is that fair?
Right, but it is fair. But I think we talked before the show about responsibility. We have to make sure our young men and our women are staying in school. Right? It is harder right now when there's a recession and when times are tough. The highly educated are going to take the jobs, the service jobs and the other jobs.
Which is happening. It's called the new working poor.
Right. They're going to bump the lower class in terms of socioeconomic folks out of the ballpark because people want to work. And if you're better educated, then you are going to replace the folks who are not as educated. So it starts going back though. It starts with staying in school. It starts with being open. We talked about technology, and if someone goes to Target or Walmart or Starbucks to apply for a job, 9 times out of 10 you will be directed to the internet.
Immediately.
It's called the digital divide. It is the internet, it's internet access between rich and poor, Anglos and minorities. And so, yes, our young people are using their cell phones to access social media, but are they able to upload resumes? And do they have traditional computers with the internet? right? It's that kind of divide. So on the flip side, you can go to a local library and apply for work. But it's those kinds of disparities that we have to continue working on, and groups like your group is actually addressing that issue.
I think that so to your question in terms of do there really need to be more focused supports around these specific populations? Definitely, I think yes, but I think, obviously there's a certain level of political will that needs to be there to say we're going to have an initiative that is strictly focused on supporting black males at that national level. But we can still definitely stay, for everyone, that we do need to revisit the education system, the priorities, what Temple and I were talking to her before the show, definitely around the shift from an industrial society to a knowledge economy, right? So,
exactly.
At this point, you do have the Walmarts of the world, but now what's the biggest brand in the world? You've got Apple, right? So Apple and the Googles of the world. So what are we doing to make sure that our kids are actually coming out and they're digitally literate? So what we do at DYN is actually we focus on literacy, but literacy for the 21st century. Right. So as opposed to literacy just being me being able to speak, read, and communicate in those kind of traditional manners, how can I actually use media to consume information? How can I understand what source these information is coming from, and how to understand issues of bias, et cetera, but also how can I communicate appropriately using different mediums and different contexts into different audiences? So for kids today, again, that can be text messaging, but that can be anything from a blog, keeping your own video blog, doing videos, et cetera. But we don't necessarily proactively tackle that at a broad scale. So when we get to issues, points where the economy is really in a problematic state, you also can look to entrepreneurship as another, opportunity for folk to really pull themselves up.
But let me talk about what other factors have contributed to this huge percentage. I understand the pillar discussion regarding accountability. I get that. But what about those who were accountable and are still finding themselves a part of this statistic?
Are you talking about the mortgage crisis, or what are we talking about still youth,
young males?
Well,
let's talk about that too. Let's talk about that too. But it just seems to me sometimes when we talk about this huge percentage, what was it, 38% we said, of African Americans.
Males.
African American males.
You're looking between the ages.
17% for African Americans in general.
Okay. So if we're talking about that, how African Americans are a noticeable chunk being affected, and we know that it has a historical reference, a historical context to it, okay? So it's always been something. And so now we're even more affected now. We feel it more than ever before. But it seems a lot of times when I experience these conversations, we're always talking about the unaccountable. The group that did not go to college, the group that we'll fall into a stereotypical conversation, and it'll always result into, had they went to school and had they did this. But what about those that—
The middle class.
What about the middle class?
The middle class right now, and honestly, the middle class right now, many of those in that class dotted their I's and crossed their T's, earned their education in multiple degrees. And so we were taught that if you earned an education, then that would be your safety net. And it still, on some level, is a safety net. The more education you have, for example, if you have a master's degree, you can go anywhere in the country and teach, even as a part-time person, right? That, to me, is a safety net.
It is a safety net.
But it's not enough, because do you remember when the Chicago Urban League held the jobs fair? This was about a couple years ago, I believe, and it was all in the media about how more than 1,000 people lined up for bus driving positions. Many of those applicants were MBAs and highly educated people. It goes back to the middle class. The safety net is it's causing havoc in terms of mental health, physical health. I was talking to a friend who mentioned his sister being a teacher at CPS, but before she became a teacher, right after finishing school, she didn't work, she didn't have health insurance. How many people with education are underinsured, right?
Exactly.
And then the health is more than just physical health.
Well,
right? It's mental health and all of that. So when we talk about the middle class, President Obama has really focused on the middle class, right? but the middle class is suffering just like the lower class.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. When we started getting into the discussions regarding class, and we talk about the middle class and the working class and the working poor, etc., I think there's a lot of class confusion. I think people really do not know what class they're in. And just to speak comically off the cuff, when President Obama was running, they immediately said that he was middle class. I said, "Oh, that's middle class?" You know, he makes 6 figures, his wife makes 6 figures. I nudged my husband, I said, you know what, dude, we're not the middle class that we thought we were. And I think there is somewhere along the way, has someone changed the definition of middle class? Okay. Because it seems as if middle class means automatic 6 figures.
Right.
And then everything else.
That's not my understanding. Right. But I understand.
Is that upper middle class?
That's upper middle class.
Because when I hear President Obama, and they're having the conversation about the class warfare, the attack on the middle class. You know, you want to grab a tambourine and say, yeah. And then you sit down and go, whoa, wait a minute, that's not me. Right. He's not talking about me, is he?
Here's an issue, too. When we talk about the median household income, we have to look at African Americans and the single parents. So you don't have those 2 incomes making up that one household. Right? And so that is also, in my opinion, why the numbers are lagging, because many of our homes are led by one person.
I think many of the homes are led by one person, but even in the homes where where both parents are present, there is still only one income. You've got a full-time mom working and a dad that can't find a job.
Because, well, I don't want to stereotype her.
That's still a single.
I think you're going to have homes that are representative of all of these pieces too.
Yeah.
I think when you brought up the Pew study earlier too, and I think one of the interesting things that did come out of that stood out to me was also they were talking about the concept of wealth in the middle class really again, but really saying that part of this study was saying for the first time that you have this this growing middle class population of blacks, but now their kids are the ones who are now sliding back into the quote unquote lower class, right? So the kids who are supposed to be positioned to be able to go to college, get that degree, and actually, sustain that for whatever reason, right now, those kids are the ones or those as adults are the ones who are technically, economically speaking, sliding.
But how convincing of an argument can you make to your children to go to college if you're sitting at home with buku degrees and you're also unemployed? How do you make that compelling case? Because I get everyone is hanging on to the education is the key. And it does have its proper place in that dialogue, but what happens when education is not enough?
Education is never enough in itself in the way that we talk about it.
Say that again.
By itself, nothing is enough. I'll say that.
Okay.
All right.
So, double negative.
All right, there you go. Professors, clearly. But I mean, I think so. It definitely takes a multi-pronged strategy across the board. You do have to improve education. You do have to improve, just basic community resources as well. So we talk about the kids in Chicago. Even in the best case scenario, if they're in school, until 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, what are they doing after that? Between 3 and 6, maybe when their parents do get home, or if their parents are working late or have weird hours, whatever other reasons. What opportunities do those kids have to develop in other ways in terms of the arts, again, and developing these other skill sets? If we're talking about media and technology, if it's right now, that's not going to happen within the classroom, who else can help take that up? So I think you have to have, how does, going back to the community-based piece, how do the churches still fit into this? There are a lot of different elements that go into sustaining a community and that go into helping support a family within that community.
Right. Well, let's talk about those federal elements then. Okay. The federal elements and let's talk about the disproportion of bailouts. The federal government has a responsibility, do you think? You think we pretty much established earlier that maybe the federal government does have a responsibility to run some type of intercession?
Intercession for African Americans?
For this huge, yeah.
Oh, well, here's my, and I've.
Do you? Yes or no? Yes or no?
Well, no.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All people.
All people.
All people.
Which is inclusive of us. The issue is that they're scared too. In a lot of cases, they don't want to actually single us out right now, especially with a black president. So because a lot of the times that'll come back and be viewed as because now we have a black president, now he's focusing on strictly black issues even for this one thing. So you have a lot of.
But here's the issue with that, right?